At every Wilson family reunion, I was the invisible one, the secretary, in a plain black dress, sipping champagne while my cousins bragged about their big careers. They never suspected that the firm they mocked me for working at was actually mine, or that I'd been quietly building an empire powerful enough to bring down their own. The Wilson family's annual reunion was every bit as suffocating as I remembered. Crystal chandeliers glittered above in my aunt's enormous mansion, their light bouncing off expensive gowns and flashy watches. The air carried that same thick mix of costly perfume and superiority that always seemed to trail my relatives wherever they went. I stayed off to the side, quietly watching my cousins battle for attention with stories about their newest accomplishments. My simple black dress, chosen deliberately to help me fade into the background, felt like armor shielding me from their judgmental glances. "Olivia," Aunt Linda's voice sliced through the chatter. "I almost didn't notice you. Still working as a secretary, dear?" I lifted my champagne glass and took a small sip, hiding a knowing smile behind it. "Administrative assistant, actually." She arched a perfectly manicured eyebrow. "Still at that little consulting firm? What was it called again?" "Summit Solutions," I answered softly. My cousin Jason, fresh from becoming partner at his father's law firm, jumped right in. "Come on, Liv. I could get you a real job, something with actual career potential." I thought of the stack of contracts sitting on my desk back at my office, my real office, not the carefully crafted cover I allowed the world to see. "I'm happy where I am," I said. "Happy?" Aunt Linda's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "Darling, you're wasting your potential. Your cousins are executives, partners, real business leaders, and you're still pushing paper for someone else." If only she knew the truth, that the someone else was me. The story of how I built my empire in secret began 10 years ago, right here in this very house. I had just graduated from business school, armed with an MBA and a bold idea for saving failing companies. I spent months polishing my pitch, convinced that my family's powerful connections would help launch my career. Instead, they mocked me. "Consulting?" Uncle Thomas sneered. "Leave that to the big firms, girl. Join the family business. Start in the mailroom. Work your way up like everyone else." By everyone else, of course, he meant my male cousins. The Wilson definition of success was strict and heavily controlled. Their fortune was built through a network of companies, each run by a carefully chosen male heir. Women were expected to marry well or take subordinate roles, nothing more. That night, I made 2 vows that would change everything. First, I would create my own company without their help or knowledge. Second, I would make them regret every dismissive word. Summit Solutions began in a cramped office above a Chinese restaurant. My savings barely covered the rent, but I had something more valuable than money. I knew how companies worked, how they failed, and more importantly, how to fix them. My first client was a small manufacturing business on the verge of collapse, already rejected by every major consulting firm in the city. I spent 3 months streamlining their operations, restructuring processes, and negotiating with creditors. Within 6 months, they were profitable again. Quietly, word began to spread about a mysterious consulting firm that could bring dying companies back to life. I recruited carefully, choosing people who shared both my vision and my discretion, with every employee bound by ironclad NDAs. My name never appeared on a single public document. I was simply the unseen CEO. As Summit Solutions expanded, I kept my disguise intact. I retained the shabby little office above the restaurant, even after moving into a sleek downtown headquarters. When relatives asked, I rattled off dull administrative duties, watching their eyes glaze over. The lie wasn't just for pride, it was strategy. The Wilson empire thrived on snapping up failing companies at bargain prices. My firm's specialty was saving those exact businesses before they hit rock bottom. We worked in the shadows, undermining my family's predatory practices while building a powerful empire of our own. Now, 10 years later, Summit Solutions had become one of the most powerful consulting firms in the industry. We operated in 12 cities, advised Fortune 500 clients, and built a reputation for transforming failing companies into thriving success stories, and still, not a single smug relative of mine had the slightest clue. "More champagne, dear?" Aunt Linda's voice snapped me back into the present. Though perhaps you should stick to water. I doubt your salary leaves much room for expensive tastes. I accepted the glass with my well-practiced smile. Thank you, Aunt Linda. How's Uncle Thomas's new acquisition coming along? Williams Manufacturing, wasn't it? Her smile wavered just enough to show a crack. There have been some complications. Nothing Thomas can't handle, of course. What she didn't know is that I was the complication. Johnson Manufacturing had been her husband's latest takeover target, but 3 months earlier they had come to Summit Solutions desperate for help. Under our restructuring plan, their stock was climbing and Thomas's bid to seize control was crumbling. I heard they brought in some consulting firm. My cousin Jason cut in smugly, probably wasting money. They're all the same, big talk, no results. I hid my grin behind a sip of champagne. Summit's fee for rescuing Johnson was more than Jason would earn in 5 years at his father's firm. Which firm? Someone asked. Jason waved a dismissive hand. Summit something. Not important. Dad says the CEO won't even show their face, probably some spoiled trust fund kid pretending to play CEO. My clutch buzzed. A message from my actual assistant. Emergency meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Wilson Ventures requesting merger discussion Johnson Manufacturing. Urgent response needed. I reread it twice, feeling the realization sink in. They were conceding defeat. After failing to acquire Johnson outright, they were now trying to force a merger, and they would need approval from Johnson Consulting Firm. My firm. Tomorrow, my family would march into a meeting believing they could push their way through, only to discover that the secretary they had dismissed for a decade was the one sitting at the head of the table. Everything all right, dear? Aunt Linda asked, eyeing my expression. I drained the last of my champagne and flashed her my brightest smile. Perfect, actually. I should get home. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Oh, she smirked. Taking notes for someone important? Something like that, I replied, already deciding exactly what I would wear. Something that would make a statement. The next morning, I rode up in my private elevator, rising to Summit Solutions' executive floor. The modest black dress from last night was gone. Today, I wore a sharply tailored Chanel suit in deep navy, a power color for a power move. My assistant, Lauren, waited at the elevator doors with a tablet in hand and a knowing grin. The Wilson Ventures team arrived early, she reported as we walked. Your uncle seems especially eager to meet Summit's CEO. I'm sure he is. I glanced at my reflection in the glass wall. Perfect. Are they already in the main conference room? Yes, along with Mr. Mitchell from Johnson Manufacturing. Lauren's eyes sparkled with amusement. Your cousin Jason's here too. He insisted on handling the legal aspects himself. I smiled at the thought of his condescending offer yesterday about finding me a real job. Who else? I asked. Your Aunt Linda came along for moral support, though she has no official role. And Ryan is representing Wilson Ventures' finance department. I checked my watch. 8:58 a.m. Have they been served coffee? Your aunt complained that no one brought it, Lauren said with a mischievous grin. I told them the administrative assistant would be in shortly. I nearly laughed. For 10 years, whenever my family visited, I had played the part of invisible office staff. This time would be very different. They had never once looked closely at the quiet woman who poured their coffee or carried their coats, and that had always been my perfect disguise. Give me 2 minutes, I told Lauren, then bring in the contracts. From behind the heavy conference room doors, I could hear their voices, my uncle's booming authority, Aunt Linda's sharp laugh, Jason's smug remarks. I inhaled deeply, then pushed the doors open. The room went silent. My uncle had claimed the far end of the table, radiating importance, with Jason and Ryan on either side in their designer suits that screamed inherited money. Aunt Linda sat nearby, pretending to be bored as she inspected her nails. On the opposite side, Mr. Mitchell from Johnson Manufacturing looked uneasy and very much alone. Linda broke the silence, first with an impatient sigh. We've been waiting for coffee for, she stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing as she really looked at me for the first time. Olivia? What are you wearing? And, why aren't you carrying coffee? I walked steadily to the head of the table and pulled out the chair directly opposite Uncle Thomas. I don't serve coffee anymore, Aunt Linda. In fact, I never really did. My uncle's face darkened. What is this? Where is Summit's CEO? We were promised the actual decision maker. I lowered myself into the chair, savoring their confusion. You have been. I am the CEO of Summit Solutions. I've been running it since I founded the company 10 years ago. The silence was crushing. Jason's jaw flapped uselessly, Ryan's pen clattered onto the table, and for the first time, Linda's polished composure cracked. Thomas recovered first, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. This is absurd. You're a secretary. No, I replied evenly. That was a cover. And clearly an effective one, since none of you ever looked past it. You were so sure I couldn't possibly succeed that you never noticed I already had. At that moment, Lauren stepped in carrying a stack of contracts. She distributed them with precision, then stood behind my chair like a silent guard. These documents, I continued, outline the conditions under which Summit Solutions will even consider approving a merger between Wilson Ventures and Johnson Manufacturing. Jason sputtered. Consider approving? You can't be serious. This has to be a prank. I slid my phone onto the table and cast Summit's financials onto the wall screen. Summit Solutions currently manages more than $12 billion in client assets. Our restructuring success rate is 93%. No changes to Johnson Manufacturing move forward without our approval. I turned my gaze on my stunned relatives. Does that sound like a joke? Linda's whisper carried more venom than volume. This is impossible. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. That's exactly what you were supposed to believe. I shifted to Mr. Mitchell. Would you care to explain why Johnson chose Summit over Wilson Ventures' offer? He straightened, his voice firm. Summit's reputation speaks for itself. When Wilson Ventures tried its hostile takeover, Summit's restructuring plan kept us alive. Since then, profits are up 45%. Ryan went pale. That restructuring plan, the one that destroyed our acquisition attempt? That was you. I started ticking off names. Miller Electronics, the deal you lost last year. Liberty Shipping, undercut right before your bid. The Anderson Group, rescued before you could dismantle them. For 10 years, I've been quietly dismantling every predatory move Wilson Ventures has tried to make. Thomas's face turned purple. You sabotaged the family business. No, I corrected coldly. I built my own business. One that saves companies instead of stripping them for scraps. If that clashed with your empire, well, call it karma. Jason shot to his feet, his voice cracking. This is ridiculous. I'm calling our lawyers. Sit down, Jason. My voice came out firm and commanding, and to my satisfaction, he froze in place. You might want to take a closer look at those contracts in front of you, the very ones your firm fought for months to secure just to get here, I said, watching comprehension spread across Jason's face. That's right, your law firm's biggest client this year? That was me too. Lauren stepped forward, placing another folder neatly on the table. This is a summary of Summit's current market position and liquid assets. As you'll see, we are now positioned to acquire a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures if we choose. The room instantly erupted. Aunt Linda's breathing grew shallow, almost frantic. Ryan fumbled with his phone, desperately checking numbers. Jason had slumped into his chair, pale and shaken. This is blackmail, Uncle Thomas snarled. No, I replied calmly. This is business. The very kind you always claimed I wasn't capable of handling. Rising smoothly, I straightened my jacket. You have until 5 p.m. today to review the merger terms. They're generous, given the circumstances. If you decline, Summit will begin buying Wilson Ventures stock on the open market tomorrow. I paused at the door, turning back just long enough to add, oh, and Aunt Linda, about that champagne you poured so smugly last night. I own the vineyard that produces it. Bought it last year. And that coffee you demanded this morning? That chain belongs to me too. I gave her a sweet smile. So yes, my salary does cover expensive tastes. Their stunned faces were the last thing I saw before the doors closed behind me. Back in my office, I finally let myself exhale. A decade of secrecy, of playing the invisible underachiever, had led to this moment. Lauren entered with a steaming cup of my favorite blend, roasted by my own coffee brand. Worth the wait, she teased. I thought back to all the times I'd carried trays of coffee into this very office, letting my family look straight through me, dismiss me as nothing more than a secretary. Every second had been worth it. My phone buzzed nonstop, calls, texts, frantic messages from family members who had already heard what happened. I silenced it without checking. They had plenty of time to adjust. I had an empire to run, and for the first time in 10 years, I no longer had to hide. The next 48 hours were exactly what you'd expect from a family built on power and appearances suddenly realizing they weren't at the top anymore. The messages poured in. Linda, darling, let's talk over lunch. You've always been my favorite niece. Jason, come on, Liv, we were just joking. Families should stick together. Ryan, you can't do this, we're blood. I ignored them, focusing instead on the rapid stream of emails from Wilson Ventures board members. They weren't fools. They could see where this was heading. By noon, an emergency board meeting was on the calendar. By 3, they had voted to accept Summit's terms. Predictably, Uncle Thomas didn't surrender quietly. He stormed into my office without warning, his voice echoing off the walls. You've betrayed this family. Lauren moved to block him, but I gestured for her to stand down. Let him speak. Without glancing up from my screen, I answered, actually, I'd say I learned from this family. Isn't this exactly what you taught us? Take power, eliminate rivals, never show weakness. His face twisted. We gave you everything, that made me laugh. You gave me nothing. Less than nothing. You taught me I'd never be enough, that my only value was in supporting the men. So I built something better. Finally, I looked at him. And by letting you believe your own assumptions, you saw exactly what you wanted to see, a quiet, unambitious woman who knew her place. That was your mistake, not mine. The fight drained out of him, leaving him slumped in one of my chairs, looking older than I had ever seen him. Why reveal yourself now? You could have kept operating in secret. I closed my laptop. Because it's time. Johnson Manufacturing isn't the only company you've been circling. Walker Electronics, Liberty Solutions, at least 3 more, good companies with solid products that only need restructuring. I'm done watching you destroy them. It's business, he muttered weakly. No, it's greed, I said flatly. And it ends now. I handed him a folder. These are the final merger terms. Summit will take controlling interest in Wilson Ventures. We'll restructure it to build companies up, not strip them down. If you agree, you can stay on as a consultant. If not, your golden parachute is on page 3. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. You've thought of everything. I allowed myself a thin smile. I learned from the best. Just not in the way you imagined. After he left, Lauren appeared with a stack of newspapers. The story had already broken across headlines. Secret CEO revealed. How one woman built a billion-dollar empire in silence. Wilson family stunned. The hidden success story they never saw coming. My phone buzzed again, but this time the message mattered. It was from my mother, the one who had divorced Uncle Thomas's brother years ago and walked away from the Wilson family's poison. The hidden success story they never saw coming. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't noise I could ignore, it was a message that mattered. The hidden success story they never saw coming. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't noise I could ignore, it was a message that mattered. It was from my mother, the one who had divorced Uncle Thomas's brother years ago and deliberately distanced herself from the Wilson family's toxic circle. Her text was only a single line. I always knew you would show them. Those words meant more to me than any headline, merger, or stock price ever could. The next few weeks blurred into a whirlwind of change. Wilson Ventures board, pragmatic as always, quickly embraced Summit's new vision. The stock soared by 42% after news of the merger broke. Companies that once trembled at the Wilson name were suddenly calling us, eager to partner with Summit. The press chased me everywhere, hungry for quotes, photos, a glimpse of the secret CEO. Of course, my family tried to adapt in their own self-serving ways. Aunt Linda attempted to reframe the entire story, smiling for cameras as she told reporters, "We always knew Olivia had potential." This just proves that the Wilson spirit of entrepreneurship runs in our blood. I answered her spin with receipts, literally. I released video from last year's reunion, 20 long minutes of her insisting I would never amount to anything. The clip went viral overnight, and just like that, Linda's media tour ended in humiliation. Jason, desperate to save face, claimed he had been in on my secret from the very beginning. But his shocked expression in that conference room had already burned itself into the internet's memory. His credibility evaporated, and within a month he was quietly forced to take a leave of absence from his law firm. Ryan was the quickest to pivot. Barely 2 weeks later, he invited me to an awkward lunch and pitched a so-called partnership. We could dominate the market together, Olivia. The Wilson Summit Alliance would be unstoppable. I sipped my coffee slowly before answering. That's not what Summit Solutions is about. We don't dominate, we elevate. His face fell, but for the first time in years, I didn't care if a Wilson cousin approved of me or not. The most powerful changes, though, came in quieter, more personal moments. A young intern, with tears in her eyes, thanked me for proving that success doesn't have to mean selling your soul. Female executives I had never met began reaching out, sharing their own experiences of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. Business schools sent invitations, asking me to speak about ethical success in a ruthless world. For the first time, my story wasn't just about me, it was opening doors for others too. 3 months later, I stood under the bright lights of a stage, accepting the Business Innovation Award. The audience's applause was deafening, but my eyes found only one person at first, my mother, sitting proudly in the front row. Behind her sat several of my former administrative assistants, women who had helped me keep my secret while building their own careers at Summit. Success isn't about who holds the most power, I told the crowd. It's about how you use the power you have. For 10 years, I played a role that made people underestimate me. I could have revealed myself sooner, but I waited until Summit Solutions was strong enough to create lasting change. That night, alone in my office, the applause still echoing in my ears, Lauren came in with breaking news. Uncle Thomas had announced his retirement. His resignation letter surprised me with an unexpected line. My niece taught me that true business success isn't measured in acquisitions or assets, but in the positive impact we create. I regret that it took losing control of my company to learn this lesson. For the first time in my life, Thomas's words didn't sting. They felt like closure. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the long game I had played. 10 years of swallowing pride, of acting small, of quietly building something that no one thought possible. And now Summit wasn't just thriving, it was changing how business itself was done. The next family reunion would certainly be interesting. I already knew where I'd host it, Summit's main conference room, the same place where I had once served them coffee and watched from the shadows. Your 4PM is here, Lauren said, stepping into my office. The CEO of Walker Electronics, the company your uncle tried to acquire. I smiled. Show them in. And Lauren? Bring coffee for everyone. The good stuff from our chain. As I stood to greet my guests, I caught my reflection in the glass window. No more hiding. No more pretending to be less. I had built something extraordinary, not in spite of my family's dismissal, but because of it. They had taught me something unintentionally, that real power doesn't always look the way people expect. Sometimes it looks like a quiet woman in a plain black dress, serving coffee and taking notes, while secretly building an empire beneath their noses. The tabloids called my story revenge. The business journals called it strategic genius. But to me, it was far simpler, it was justice. Justice, served one corporate rescue at a time, with a side of perfectly brewed coffee. And tucked away in a tiny office above a Chinese restaurant, my original desk still waits. I keep it as a reminder that success doesn't always scream for attention. Sometimes it works silently, patiently, until the moment it reshapes everything. That's the real secret to success, not the power you flaunt, but the power you build while no one's watching. And when the time is right, you let the world finally see what you've created.